Up in the air, today we have with us a man with extraordinary flair. He's a psychologist, he's a coach, he's worked with some amazing leaders, he's worked with sports celebrities, and he has worked with leaders who are highly toxic and he's helped them change their behavior. On the show, we welcome Gaj Ravichandra. Welcome George Clooney to the show. Thank you for being here. Truly appreciate it. Up in the air, that's what they call your adventures. So tell us more, George, about yourself. And sorry, apologies. He is Gaj Ravichandra. I just call him George Clooney for a very simple reason, which he's going to explain to us now. So if you could let our listeners, our audience know, why do they call you George Clooney, or did George Clooney steal your identity?
So there definitely is some identity theft going on. I don't know on which side that identity theft is happening, but we are brothers from another mother for sure. I think that's definitely the case. Now, look, my career very much started off helping people when they were going through the transition of losing a job. And so that movie Up in the Air was very typical of the kind of day that I might have when you're going and supporting people in organizations as they're going through arguably one of the hardest times, right, in their professional careers, when they're finding that they perhaps are no longer going to be employed and they might need to go off into this big wide world, not on their time frames necessarily, to go find that next opportunity. So yes, not only were they up in the air in their own minds, but was also traveling to support organizations to be able to have those tough conversations, but also to support people to make that transition clearly as well.
Now, Gaj, in what year was this you were doing this, and for how long was this?
So this was in the year 2000. So this was the turn of the century, and so my daughters would remind me how old and how long ago that was. It was a very long time ago, but it was an interesting time because obviously things have changed a lot, right, in the last 2 decades. And so as an intern psychologist, that was really my first experience of coming into working with people at one of the most vulnerable points in their lives. And out of that came a lot of other little journeys and little trips, which I'm sure we'll talk about today.
Because, I mean, if you look at it from the journey, you've managed to coach celebrities, sports people, you've looked at toxic leaders and managed to get them out of certain behavior. Before we get to all of that, what I want to understand is, while you were in this particular role, how did it impact you? Because this is, like you use the word, a very vulnerable situation with the person you're going to talk to this about. And how did you manage yourself? And then how did you manage the other person?
Well, it's a good question. It's a really challenging situation to be in without feeling empathy for people. And one of the things that I noticed going through that process that was happening in myself was sometimes frustration, right? That we are facing organizations and societies where people are being let go without really much support or the opportunity for support. And more than that, that they weren't necessarily given the tools and the techniques, the mindset, the knowledge to be able to go and make that transition so that they could actually contribute again back to society in some meaningful way, right? So that part I had to recognize and to deal with and process. But also out of that, I learned so much from how individuals manage that process in themselves. So I think I was much more of a student than I was a psychologist helping somebody during those early stages. And there was something really fascinating that happened, which, you know, life is a full circle, right? And at that time, you know, 20 odd years ago, one of the things I noticed in people who were making that transition more successfully, there were some very clear things that they did that helped them much beyond other people. So for example, they would be actually organized and committed to finding a job, which meant every day they were doing something that was contributing to that. They didn't take a day off, right? They were committed to that, and they did it in a way where they managed their energy. Right? The second thing was there was very limited ego that they actually participated in. They actually said, you know, I don't like networking. Why do I have to go and find a job? All of a sudden they changed to saying, well, here's an opportunity for me to meet a whole bunch of people that are probably going to have interesting stories to tell. Right? And so they reframed and thought about things differently. The other thing was around this resilience and mental toughness. The idea that whatever hardship comes your way, that you actually have this ability within yourself to actually find a better solution, right, or an outcome. That was immensely powerful. Now, I didn't know it was mental toughness at the time. It was only about 15 years later that I really realized that there is this terminology and components of our personality that help us to move on through these hardships, including finding a job.
You say, Gaj, you say the words mental toughness and resilience. What do they really mean? Because I have seen people talk about it, written articles about it, and there are a number of times I just say it's a load of fluff. Yeah? Although I know there is something behind it, but it's just the way these programs or these talks are done. There's no substance to it to explain or understand how to implement it in yourself. So mental toughness, resilience, what does it really, really mean? You come from a scientific background. So what does it really mean in a practical environment, such as losing your job, or having going through a divorce, or finding it difficult to complete your MBA? What does it really mean?
So I think over time, one of the things that I've been thinking about is how do we take a theoretical, interpretation of mental toughness? So for example, the theoretical definition was something around, mental toughness is a personality style that actually allows you to be able to deal with any sort of pressure or challenge, regardless of the environmental conditions that you are in. Right? Now, over time, what I've learned is that there's an element of that which is absolutely true. It is a personality style. You can develop it, you can change that and improve it. But at the same time, it's not just about persisting all the time. So my sort of definition is more around mental toughness is the ability and the knowledge and wisdom that you need to have to be able to know when to keep pushing through something, but also to know when to pull back and to rest and recuperate. That also allows you then to be able to keep going. Right? And it's a bit like having, looking at the ocean and the waves that keep coming through. Right? There are good waves and there are bad waves, right? That have a healthy versus an unhealthy impact on us. And knowing that we can get through those waves, but we need to take a break. We need to have a rest, right? You don't typically, unless it's a tsunami, have just one wave of water, right? Even a tsunami has multiple waves that come and hit us, right? What do we do in between those waves? Well, the ocean actually rests. If you notice, there is a pattern to the tide, right? We also need to rest. And that then allows us to be able to deal with these challenges as they come up, whether it's finding a workplace, a new opportunity in your job, whether it's about dealing with a partner, whether it's other situations that you come across in your life. So having that ability to say yes, but also knowing when to rest is critical.
So having that ability, so what you're saying is having that ability to move forward. I'm uncomfortable with the word push, personally. Move forward and taking a seat back when required. So how you use your energy, that's what you're saying to me. What are your thoughts when people talk about, I hear this again and again, get out of your comfort zone, get out of your comfort zone. And I'm like, why do I need to do that? I mean, if somebody comes and steals my sofa, that's like my comfort place to sit. Yeah? So I'm unable to fathom the fact that people keep on pushing this fact, you got to get out of your comfort zone. I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I need rest. No, get out of your comfort zone. What are your thoughts? And especially if you're thinking from a clinical perspective, being a psychologist, how do you deal with that?
One of the ways that tends to be really interesting when we look at this concept is that getting out of our comfort zone is another way of looking at things differently. It means that, we think about learning, right? Whenever we learn anything, it's uncomfortable because it's typically not something we know or we're aware of, right? So technically, if you were to learn the times table for the first time, or you're learning strategy for the first time, or for me, when I was doing a Master of Commerce in Economics, one of the things that I had to go through was going through the accounting tables and having a look at balance sheets, right? My brain had to be completely rewired. It was very uncomfortable for me to look at how to do that, but I know it's important. It helps me to then be able to look at the fiscal health of a company, yeah? But it was uncomfortable. And what did that mean? It meant that I needed to perhaps look at things a little bit differently. The lens at which I looked through my life might have needed to be tweaked a little bit, right? So for me, pushing through the discomfort, right, means that you are probably not going to be in a place that you were yesterday. You're going to be in a new place, but that's going to require you to look at the world and the information that's presented to you with a different lens. Yeah? So you can get some prescriptive glasses, right, to deal with that, and that's important. And in the way that we use different glasses to look at sometimes distance versus, short, long-sightedness, where you have to read something close up. In the same way, our mind also needs to adjust, right? And so that helps us to then look at different situations and decide if something is uncomfortable for me, what is it within me that's making me uncomfortable, right? Is it the way that I'm thinking about this and feeling about this? Right? Is it the fact that I don't think there's any value in going down this path? So that questioning process can be very helpful, but it doesn't need to be painful, right? So attaching pain to discomfort is a very different thing, right? And we do this a lot. And particularly when you think about our own lives, whether it's personal relationships, professional relationships, sometimes we'll see somebody who reminds us of a previous boss, right, or a colleague, and immediately something is triggered, right, within us, the discomfort, right? But we attach that to something, which is perhaps pain, or annoyance, or frustration, or anger, right? Of course it's going to be harder to go through, right? So we need to question that, and then we need to detach our feelings to some extent from the process. The people who tend to have the greatest success, if you're doing, a lot of your students, going through at Exceed are going to be MBA and doctorate, right? These are pretty intensive programs. There's going to be a lot of discomfort. And in fact, if there's probably no discomfort, I'd be really interested to know what people are learning through that process, right? I think that would be a pretty safe question to ask. And the reason is, what would be the purpose of coming and learning something when you are not being challenged in a way, right? So embrace the discomfort. That means you're probably going to learn something new. It's just around the corner. Yeah? And so taking that on board is perhaps a different mindset to look at things.
Interesting you say that. So what I'm hearing is, my translation to this conversation is, expand your comfort zone. It's not about no pain, no gain, which is like, again, is like, why would people say that? It's more of expanding it. It's not about getting out, but expanding yourself, improving yourself, bettering yourself.
Yeah, and I think it's a great way of looking at it. Instead of thinking, I got to smash through this barrier, right, of pain, well, actually you can actually just stretch, right? And if you go through the process of stretching, and if you realize in life, that is what we are doing. We are stretching what we know, right? We might be uncomfortable about knowing about digital marketing, right, and how important that is right now. I go through a course at Exceed, or I go and learn some things from a textbook. I, sign up to some online programs, and I all of a sudden start to connect the dots, right, on what we're doing.
So, Gaj, you're talking about learning, and Exceed is all about online learning, the MBAs and the doctorates. And you being from the background you are, what is your emphasis on people carrying out ongoing learning, getting themselves educated? Is it worth it, or is it just a waste of time?
Life is about learning, right? So the idea that we are not learning even by simply waking up in the morning, right, and going and interacting with anybody, I think would be dismissive of our typical environment that we're in. I think the process of also going through these programs is probably two or threefold, right? The first is, there is some technical knowledge and things that you're going to gain, right, as a result of that, which is very helpful. It may not be immediately, but eventually you get to connect the dots, right, on the kind of knowledge that you gain. The second thing is potentially the relationships, right, that you actually can gain as well. So you don't have to be limited to just what's in front of your screen. You can actually choose to connect with your alumni, choose to connect with your cohort, choose to connect with your professors, choose to connect with organizations that are coming in and talking, choose to connect to Rohit and to see what sort of relationships he has, what sort of experiences he has, right? There's a massive exposure that people are getting through this. And I think the combination of those things all contributes to our learning. Now, the day that you stop learning, this is a great quote, right, that says, the day that you stop learning is the day when you start unlearning, right? Which is really interesting because it assumes that you're not just static in your life, that there is a fluid state in which we are all living. And you could go talk to a physicist that would explain that metaphysics works exactly the same way, right? You could talk to a psychologist who would tell you that's very similar from a personality and mental perspective. You could go talk to a chemist, right, or a biologist, or a mathematician, right? And they would explain that things operate in this kind of context of flux and change. Life is not static. Learning is not static, right? And so sometimes these universal laws can be really helpful to us. This is just my perspective. These universal laws can be super helpful to put some things into context, to understand how do we position ourselves in the world, how do we continue to contribute to the world, and how do we do that for ourselves and for other people around us. We're not living in a black hole, right, a void or a vacuum. Right? So how are we interacting with those around us as well?
Gaj, what I'm hearing from you is you're giving your seal of approval. Better go out and learn. If it means going to exceed or just doing something which is going to expand you, improve you. If you want to go to the next level, the best way is, one of the good ways is to go and educate yourself in a proper framework, in a proper structure. Which comes to my next question is, Gaj, Exceed focuses on online learning. It's purely online, the MBAs, the doctorate, which is outstanding that they've been able to do that. And the condition which has allowed them to really accelerate in this is because of what COVID did to us all around us. You yourself have done an online course, as in created something, especially for people who are looking for a movement in their career. Okay, tell us about that and why did it come up? Because you sponsored it as well, which is going into thousands and thousands of dollars, the sponsorship. I want to understand, what is it all about? I want the listeners to know that. Why did you do that? How is it helping people out?
Yeah, actually, what's really interesting is that we've come up to about $1 million of product sponsorship now for people around the world to help them in their careers. This was a really important part of our business Compass, and what we wanted to do for the world was to be able to provide knowledge at a time when people needed it. So the idea that you could give people a framework of how to find a job was typically really related to top institutions. It could be business schools and other corporate entities, right? So that knowledge was held in with a very small elite group of people. Why couldn't we take that information and distill that and actually provide that to people at a very low cost barrier around the world? And so that started us thinking about, well, how do we deploy something like that? Well, it has to be online. That's got to be the way that we do this. And it happened to happen during COVID, when people were losing their jobs. So that accelerated our thinking to be able to get this out to the market as quickly as possible. So through that process and marketing and so forth, the Jamaican government found out about this initiative. And so we worked with Projects Abroad. It's an NGO to basically provide 1,000 students in Jamaica with the opportunity to learn how to find a job, right? We offered it to veterans, in the military around the world, no charge, right? If you've served your country and you have worked to be able to provide protection for your citizens, fellow citizens, you deserve to be able to have products and services that actually give you the opportunity to think about your next career shift. Right? Not everyone wants to be in the military for 35, 40 years. Yeah? So how do you take those skills and apply that? And so that is something that we did because firstly we believed in the fact that everyone should have access to this information. We did put a price on it because we felt that there is some value associated with that knowledge. But we wanted to make sure that it was available in a platform that was easy to access 24 hours a day, and that it was going to be able to be managed by the individual with very minimal instructions. And the test was me. I had to idiot-proof it. I'm an idiot when it comes to technology, right? I am nowhere near savvy as anywhere near the students that are going to be watching this
I'm
video.
glad I didn't say that.
I'm nowhere near the tech savviness, right, that your students, watching this are. So if I could use it and it was going to be simple enough to use, pretty much anyone would be able to use this, right? And so we went through that process of simplifying and making that possible.
Going back to mental toughness, resilience, you've worked with some very high profile people, and some of them displaying possibly toxic behavior in their leadership style or in the way they behave at work. What exactly do you do with them so they get out of that toxic energy? To brief it up, to sum it up, what do you do? What do you do to them? Do you slap them? What do you do?
Rohit, I mentally slap them. Yeah. That's pretty much what I do. No, look, in all honesty, any sort of behavior overdone becomes a weakness, right? So if we think about mental toughness, there are a number of frameworks that we can use. We use one particular one out of AQR, out of the UK, had many, many decades of research. Commitment, challenge, control, and confidence are the 4 factors there. Let's take one of those, right? Control as an example. There are leaders who have very high levels of control, what we would call life control. They believe they control everything, right? Now that at a very high extreme level, we would probably call micromanagement or dictatorship, right? That is probably not healthy, right? On the other end of the spectrum, that would be someone who is given into life and is literally in a fluid state where they have no belief or control in anything they do, right? I know that sounds wonderful. It's almost like a nirvana, right? It doesn't necessarily relate to a world that we are in here, right? It's not necessarily practical. So we need to find something in between, right? So with some of these leaders who are on the extreme end in some sort of toxic, approach to control, we need to show them what it looks like to actually shift that radar. The belief that people have dictates their behavior. If I don't control my employees, they won't perform. If they don't perform, I'm going to look bad in this job. I'm not going to hit my KPIs and my targets, right? There's usually a belief system that sits underneath all this. Those beliefs are based on values, right? So understanding those values can actually allow us to start to dig a little bit deeper into the reasons as to why these individuals behave this way, and then starting to construct perhaps a healthier belief system, right? That is also much more conducive to supporting people and leading people in a way that gets the best outcomes. So I would say, quick answer to your question there is we need to very quickly understand what that belief system and value system is, and then be able to come up with some practical plans around how we would address that using little steps, right? Each of these requires some sort of process, right? One of the interesting things I find is that people get so caught up on the outcomes or the goals of things. Of course that's going to create stress and anxiety for people, right? But if you refocus on the process, the day-to-day journey that you take, it is a much more pleasurable experience. If you fall in love with this, right? That's the thing you experience every day, the grind, right? That can be a much more pleasurable experience for people. The outcomes tend to take care of themselves, right? And so it's about reshifting our focus, reframing our focus to that process, and then working on that. That can have a massive change, or the ability to change people.
There's an article I read, and it was about the myth of having a vision board. And you'd written a comment on it saying, interesting, but it always helps to have that vision. I just want to understand your thought process, because is it worth for individuals to have a vision? And how do you know that your vision is actually not really a proper vision, and what do you do about it? So simply is it worth having a vision in life or even in your work?
I think the purpose of a vision is to give you some direction. That's it. Doesn't mean the vision is going to come true. It doesn't mean that you can somehow predict the way the world is going to turn out, right? It doesn't mean that you are going to put so much pressure on yourself that you have to achieve this vision in some way, right? But having a direction means that instead of pottering around in circles, you choose a particular path, right? Now the beauty is that we can pivot that path whenever we want, right? And that is really important to understand. The pressure is not about achieving a vision. Pressure is choosing a direction. And then when you do that, you never know what you're going to come up against, right? It might be things that you didn't even forecast, right? As you were putting this thought together. But part of the reason for the vision is, and the vision board in particular, I know that was something particularly in a comment, is that we are multi-sensory beings. When you use multiple senses to be able to set a goal for yourself or to think about the future, you are more likely to achieve it. This has been proven by science, it has been proven by people day in, day out, over hundreds and hundreds of years. And so that is pretty clear, we know that. But we shouldn't get tied to something that creates stress and anxiety, right? That detachment is really important. And if we find a way to do that, it is exceptionally liberating, right? And so the focus then again shifts to the process, the journey, falling in love with that, so that then yields some sort of outcome that is healthy for us. When you're fixated on a vision, it can create stress and anxiety, right, when not managed properly. And it can also create a lot of stress and anxiety for other people. Right? You think about Steve Jobs, right? His vision was very clear, right, about putting beautiful technology in the hands of people, right? That would have created a lot of stress for other people around him, right, to achieve that vision. I mean, it's wonderful. I mean, I carry an iPhone and I enjoy the fact that I can see his vision realized, right? But it could have been many other things, right? And I'm pretty sure that that was perhaps not the first iteration of what he had created. But falling in love with the process of innovation, falling in love with the process of working as a team, right, allows you to achieve those things.
You spoke about not getting fixated to that vision. Great to have a vision, not to get fixated, or what I will say is obsessed, or be a psychopath. That's what I'm thinking, being a psychopath in achieving that vision, because it causes stress and anxiety. And in the past we've spoken about stress and anxiety, and especially with what's happened across the globe, the level of stress and anxiety has increased significantly. People have lost jobs, businesses have collapsed. Yes, there seems to be a glimmer of hope, a glimmer of light, that things are now getting better. So how does one come out of setbacks? Because anxiety and stress is going to be there, and you will get setbacks. How does one how does one find the strength to come out of setbacks? Be it in getting a job, be it improving their relationship with their loved ones, or be it just not being so fixated with one way of doing things and finding another way or another path. What does one do?
Clearly, I've experienced a lot of stress and anxiety. Before this interview, I had an afro, and this is what's happened, right? Look, I think stress and anxiety should clarify that that's actually, it's not about getting it to zero, right? There is going to be stress and anxiety. There's good stress and bad stress, right? There's good anxiety and bad anxiety. When it gets to a point where it's unhealthy for you, right, and your mind and your body are suffering, that's what we want to try and avoid, right? So if we use that sort of stress and anxiety to a point to help navigate our life, can be very helpful. But when a setback comes up, there are some things that we can do to support us. One thing that I've seen that works really well is thinking about what's in our control. There are a lot of things right now that are out of our control. You know, there are wars going on, there's pandemics happening, there's all sorts of things, right? And one of the things that tends to happen is that we sort of absorb all this information and then actually start to feel as if these are limiting factors in our life, right? And we live in this VUCA world, right? This volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous environment where we can create some more stability for ourselves, right? Requires us to think about what's actually in our control. When we focus on the things out of our control, it can create a high level of unnecessary stress and anxiety, right? So focusing on what you can control. In sports psychology, we call it controlling the controllables, right? It's super important. When you start to do that, you then start to look at, well, how do I overcome a challenge or a problem? How do I set some mini goals or steps? What's one thing I can do today, right? That's going to help me to overcome this. What support do I need, right? One of the things that we find is that we're social creatures. To think that we need to overcome a problem in a vacuum doesn't actually make sense. It's not really happened in the history of mankind that we've overcome massive problems by one person thinking about something and then not being able to engage with other people to be able to achieve it, right? Same thing happens in our own lives, whether it's our career, our leadership capability, our performance, our education, whatever it might be. And so focusing on that can be really helpful as well, right? So support your tribe, who is going to be there to help you. Being able to look at what is actually controllable by you. There are a lot of things that can't do that. Thinking about what creates some stability for yourself in a world that is unstable. So it could be routines, patterns, things that you set up for yourself throughout the course of a day or a week, right? That can really help you to do that as well. But it's also the script that you tell yourself in the morning. If you wake up and you've got a economics exam, right? And you tell yourself, I'm really terrible at economics, right? You can pretty much predict that your performance is going to be lower than what it would be if you started to have a more positive, optimistic approach. Right? Your mind is open, you tend to pick up on more of the detail, you're more likely to go back to the answer and check it. There's a lot more focus. We know this, right? Studies tell us this. So what we tell ourselves fundamentally is probably the most important thing, right? So get that script right in our head.
So, which comes to the next question for me is, people go ahead doing an MBA and they say, yep, I've done an MBA, I deserve a job. And they only do an MBA because they want a better job. Is that the purpose of an MBA, just to get a better job, or is it more than that?
Are you trying to get me fired? Like, what's happening here? I've been slapped on the hand for speaking at induction programs at MBA schools.
Because you've done stuff for INSEAD, you've done it for HALT, you've done work over there. So it's interesting to see how you interact with all these people, because you mentor them.
Yeah, so regardless of the knowledge or the certificate that you receive, none of that really matters as much as the individual themselves and how you manage your brand through the process, right, of what happens next. So say you get a doctorate and you get an MBA, right? There are tens of thousands of people getting this certificate, perhaps on a monthly or bi-monthly process.
Which is great,
right?
awesome.
Which is fantastic. We're getting lots of people with knowledge coming out. But so what, right? What are we going to do with this? How do you differentiate yourself in a world that is constantly changing, right? We are moving from having linear careers to non-linear careers. We've gone from typical employment to fractional employment, right? So that means probably 10 years from now, Rohit, people will have 2 part-time jobs. That's going to become the norm, right? Now, that sounds crazy when you think about that, right? But already 20% of the US population have moved that way, right? So we're starting to see this huge shift. Now, what does that mean? It means you can't be reliant on one employer to give you a job, right? You're actually going to have multiple employers who are paying for your life. So we need to become better at branding ourselves. We need to become better at understanding what makes us unique. Right? There's this stone, this gemstone called tanzanite.
Yes.
It is this one stone that comes out of this little mine in Tanzania. And over time has become so precious because the rarity, the scarcity of that stone is so immense. That's how we need to treat ourselves. If we're going to be like tanzanite, what do we need to demonstrate to the people around us? Now, people used to laugh at TikTok and Instagram and so forth. I used to be one of those people, right? Let's be fair. But I've seen the immense value that you can use from reaching out into areas of discomfort, right? and actually putting yourself out there into context. And you do this beautifully, right? I mean, you kind of put out these videos that are immensely helpful for people, right? Now, that is a branding conversation. How have you positioned yourself in a way that adds value, right, to your potential customers, employers, and so forth? So if anyone's watching this video and you're thinking you're just going to have one job that is going to be, the next opportunity, one thing I like to challenge is, well, does it have to be one job? Could it be multiple jobs, right, that you put yourself into? And how would you position yourself to be able to be attractive to multiple employers at the same time? Okay? That's probably going to be the way that we are going. That's what the research tells us. It is very clear. So now we need to position ourselves as such.
We've spoken about toxic leadership. We've talked about resilience. We've spoken about mental toughness. We've spoken about stress, anxiety. We've spoken about how the job environment is changing and is going to significantly change. So there's the fractional, I believe that's what you said, how fractional employment is going to be done. Nowadays you've got the gig industry, I think that they call it. That's happening. You tend to work, and which I've mentioned before, is with students who are studying in places like INSEAD or HALT and some other well-known, highly successful educational institutes. When you're interacting with these students who are actually also professionals, who are probably running an organization worth $10 million or something, when you look at them, what do you see as a commonality in them, as what makes them a success?
So I think success means different things to different people. And when I think about the individuals, what they have in common, well, they're all coming to learn. So this idea that they are coming to accumulate knowledge that is going to be processed by them in some way to help them in the future, that they feel that what they've had is perhaps not enough in terms of that knowledge, right, to get to that next step. Perhaps they feel stuck. They don't know how to get to that next point. So going through that process of actually learning is wonderful, right? And it is very uncomfortable. The thing that I used to tell people at induction is welcome back to school, right? Because that's what this is, right? It feels very much like you're going back to school, right? When you were 15, 20, 25 years ago. So I think that learning mindset is really critical to them. The other is the ability, and where I've seen people be more successful than others in terms of the value and the impact. That's how I sort of measure success for me, right? Is how they actually contribute to conversations. Who do they talk to, right, and network with openly? Are they willing to make themselves a little bit uncomfortable, right, through that process, to actually open up maybe new ways of thinking that they didn't even realize that they were akin to? Right? So I think those kinds of things are much more important, right? One of the things that's also really important is how they commit to that experience. There is a wonderful book called Grit by Angela Duckworth, right? She interviewed the 1% of the 1%, like the most elite, successful of various disciplines, from the top ballerina in the world through to the top Olympians, business leaders, and so forth. And she found this one particular statement that resonated with those who had success in common, which I thought was really interesting. It's about finishing what you started. And if you can do that, you've set yourself up for so much more success than most other people on this planet. In anything. If you finish your MBA, right, your doctorate program, if you finish that conversation with a professor, if you finish that LinkedIn contact request, if you finish your resume and your digital profile and brand that you set up, right, all those things contribute to something. There are a trail of people that have left unfinished projects along their life. It's like a train wreck, right, that has been left behind, right? And they wonder sometimes to themselves, why haven't I achieved the success that this person has achieved? Well, if you looked at it objectively, you'd see that that person committed to something and they went all in. And that's super important, right? It's a very common factor.
Thank you, Gaj. We're going to finish what we started, and so we are now closing the interview. Truly appreciate you being over here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rohit, and thank you to Exceed, this wonderful opportunity as well.
Talkex. Thank you.
Yeah, and Talkex.